blood, never forgets. It carries the weight of every mistake, every decision made in the darkness, every life taken to survive. No matter how far you run, it stays with you, in the scars and the shadows, in the heartbeat of those who've lived by the gun. In the small, dusty town of Pine Ridge, Wyoming, Sarah Blackwood had made peace. Pine Ridge was a town where everyone came to bury their past and start anew, a place where old wounds could be hidden behind the smell of fresh bread and the hum of daily work. It was here, on the edge of the frontier, that Sarah had hoped to escape the ghosts of the past that had once defined her. For over 15 years, she had lived a life of quiet simplicity. She ran the local general store, its shelves stocked with everything from tools to canned goods. The wooden floors creaked under the weight of years, and the shop was modest but well kept. The bell above the door jingled each time a customer entered, and the constant rhythm of commerce soothed her troubled soul. Her hands, once stained with blood, now worked with the same precision but in the service of peace. She rolled dough for the bakery when Mrs. Peterson couldn't, mended clothes for the elderly, and offered advice on gardening to anyone who needed it. Life in Pine Ridge was simple, steady, and Sarah had long believed that it could remain that way. But she knew better. The past, no matter how deeply buried, had a way of coming back. The Red Rose, that name, that legend, still lingered in the air like the scent of gunpowder. Sarah had worked hard to bury the memories of those years, of the bandit leader, ruthless and feared, known across the West as a killer with a heart as cold as the wind sweeping across the plains. The red bandana she wore, the twin revolvers strapped to her side, they were relics of a life she had left behind. Yet, some nights, when the wind howled and the darkness pressed close, Sarah would see flashes of it, the sharp, cold glint of a revolver, the echo of a gunshot, and her name whispered in fear, Red Rose. Her past would surface, but she fought to keep it at bay. Now, at 45, Sarah had become a mother, a role that had softened the sharp edges of her past. Emily, her daughter, was the light of her life. At 16, Emily had her father's hazel eyes, soft and gentle, a constant reminder of what Sarah had lost. Emily was everything Sarah had worked for: innocence, hope, and the promise of a future free from violence. They lived in a modest cabin on the edge of Pine Ridge. The house had been quiet, filled with the warmth of their little family. Emily, with her fiery red hair like her mother's, often helped in the store, and Sarah watched with pride as her daughter grew. She was smart, quick to learn, and even quicker to charm everyone around her. But Sarah couldn't shake the worry that someday Emily's own past, their past, would catch up with them. The past never truly lets go. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the horizon with colors of orange and purple, Sarah and Emily sat together at the kitchen table. The fire crackled in the hearth, and the scent of freshly baked bread filled the room. Emily's voice was light, carefree, as she spoke of a letter she had received from a cousin in Denver. "It says there's a job opening in the bakery there," Emily said, eyes sparkling with excitement. "I could move there, work with Mrs. Peterson, and then maybe we could—" "No," Sarah said, a bit more sharply than she intended. She caught herself and softened her voice. "You'll stay here. Pine Ridge needs you. I need you." Emily looked at her mother, confusion clouding her features. "But, Mama, I want to see the world. You always told me we should never be afraid of chasing our dreams. Why should I stay?" Sarah took a deep breath, her heart tightening. She had promised herself that Emily would never know the truth about her past, the woman she had once been, the woman she could still become if provoked. "Because the world is a dangerous place," Sarah said quietly, her voice heavy with unsaid words. "And I've worked hard to make sure you're safe here." The following morning, as the town began to stir, Sarah felt a strange unease settle in her chest. The quiet, steady rhythm of life had shifted somehow. It wasn't just a tension in the air that warned her. It was something deeper, something that tugged at her instincts. Emily had left for the bakery early, just like always, carrying the fresh bread to the sheriff's office and Mrs. Peterson's shop. It was a routine, one Sarah had grown accustomed to. Yet as the hours passed and the sun climbed higher, Sarah's unease grew. It wasn't until the afternoon when Sheriff Daniels knocked on her door, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by grim professionalism, that Sarah knew something was terribly wrong. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, almost reluctant. "Emily didn't come into town today. I've checked with Mrs. Peterson. She said she never showed up for work." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She left early this morning. I haven't seen her since." Sheriff Daniels looked at her with something resembling sympathy. "She's not in town, Sarah. No one's seen her that night." Sarah found herself standing at the edge of Pine Ridge, staring out into the dark wilderness beyond. Her mind raced. Emily was gone, and every instinct she had, every ounce of her past, told her that this was no accident. Someone had taken her daughter. Her hand clenched around the weathered handle of her revolver as the wind howled around her. Blood remembers, she thought bitterly, closing her eyes. It remembers every sin, every sacrifice, and every promise broken in the name of survival. And it was calling her name once more. The air was thick with tension. The storm's fury still raging outside as Sarah Blackwood sat by the hearth, the crackling fire casting long shadows across the room. Emily's absence felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. Each minute that ticked by a reminder of the terror she couldn't escape. The sheriff's men had combed the town, the surrounding fields, and even the riverbank, but nothing had turned up. No sign of Emily. As the night deepened, Sarah felt the walls closing around her, the stillness of the house suffocating her. Her daughter, the one thing she'd fought so hard to protect, had been taken. She had promised Emily a life free from violence, free from the blood-soaked legacy of the past that haunted her. And now, that promise lay shattered, just like her peaceful life. She hadn't been able to sleep. Her mind kept replaying the moment the sheriff had told her Emily was missing, the cold look in his eyes, the desperation in his voice. He had no answers, no leads, just more questions. Her daughter's sudden disappearance could only mean one thing. Someone wanted her mother to return to life she had left behind. Sarah stood and moved to the window, her eyes scanning the pitch-black horizon. The storm had passed, but something else lingered in the air. The feeling that she was being watched, that someone was waiting for her to make the first move. Her breath fogged up the glass as she leaned closer, and then it hit her, the unmistakable scent of gunpowder, of leather, of dust, the scent of the past. She turned from the window and moved towards a small cupboard where she kept her most trusted possessions, items she had vowed to keep buried, forgotten. In the quiet of the night, Sarah moved with practiced ease, her hand steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts racing in her mind. She had known this day would come, though she had never wanted to acknowledge it. She reached up and unlocked the small cupboard under the stairs. The familiar creak of the wood was a sound she hadn't heard in years. Beneath layers of dried herbs and blankets, Sarah found the trunk, hidden away from prying eyes. Her heart raced as she slowly lifted the heavy lid, the familiar scent of old leather and metal filling the air. Inside, silver-plated Remington revolvers gleamed under the dim light of the lantern she had lit. The rose engravings on the handles caught the light, their delicate patterns a chilling reminder of the woman she had once been. Her hand hovered over the guns for a moment before she turned her attention to the red bandana lying atop the stack of wanted posters. It was faded, the once vibrant fabric now worn and frayed at the edges. But the symbol was unmistakable, the sign of death, of vengeance, of red rose. The bandana had once been her mark, her banner, the thing that struck fear into the hearts of those who saw it. Sarah hesitated. For 20 years, she had kept these items hidden, locked away, trying to bury the ghost of Red Rose. She had been Sarah Blackwood, widow and shopkeeper. She had built a new life for herself, one centered around peace, around Emily. But now, that life had been torn apart in an instant. She reached out, fingers trembling as she grasped the bandana, holding it as though it were the very essence of her former self. This was no longer a memory. This was reality. With a slow, deliberate motion, Sarah tied the bandana around her neck, the fabric tight against her throat. She felt a rush of adrenaline course through her veins, a fire she thought had long since died awakening once more. The weight of the revolvers in her hands felt both foreign and familiar, the cold metal, the smooth triggers, the way of the past. She hadn't forgotten how to wield them. She hadn't forgotten what it felt like to be Red Rose. The woman they had feared, the woman they had tried to erase, was coming back. With a steady breath, Sarah looked around the small cabin. The warmth of the fire seemed distant, like something that belonged to a life that had long passed. She didn't know when she had made the decision, whether it had been hours ago or when the sheriff had come to her door, but there was no turning back now. She had to find Emily, and she would burn the world down to do it. Sarah's boots made a soft thud as she walked to the door, her hand brushing against the worn wood. She opened it slowly, letting the night air wash over her. The sound of crickets chirping filled the silence. Pine Ridge was quiet, almost eerily so. Too quiet. Her gaze shifted toward the mountains in the distance. Ash Hollow. She hadn't been there in years. It was a ghost town now, a place forgotten by most. But Sarah knew better. She knew what lay hidden in those mountains, what had been buried beneath the years of dust and decay. Someone had taken Emily. Someone knew who she was, and they were waiting for her to come. As Sarah stepped out into the night, the weight of her past pressing down on her shoulders, a lone rider emerged from the shadows, his figure silhouetted against the moonlight. Sarah's hand instinctively went to the grip of her revolver, her senses alert, her heart pounding in her chest. The rider halted just out of her reach, the moonlight glinting off his rifle. Red Rose, the voice called, rough and familiar, sending a shiver down her spine. Long time no see. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the rider dismounted, revealing his weathered face. "Lucas Reeves," she said, her voice colder than the mountain air. He grinned, a twisted smile that made her blood run cold. "I've been waiting for you. It's time to finish what you started, Red Rose." By dawn, Sarah Blackwood was no more. In her place stood Red Rose, a name feared across the territory, a name buried in the dust of the past, but not forgotten. Her horse, a sturdy bay mare, stamped impatiently by the cabin as she mounted, feeling the familiar weight of the revolvers on her hips. The cold morning air bit her skin, but it was nothing compared to the chill that gripped her heart. Emily, her daughter, was out there somewhere, and Red Rose wasn't going to stop until she had her back. The sun was still low on the horizon as she spurred the horse into motion, the dust of Pine Ridge already a memory. Her mind raced with thoughts of the Reeves gang. Ash Hollow, once a thriving settlement, now reduced to a ghost town, was a perfect place for criminals to disappear, a place where the law couldn't reach. But Sarah knew it well. It had been her haunt years ago, a place where deals had been struck and blood had been spilled. The Reeves brothers, Lucas especially, had always been ruthless, and now they had her daughter. The ride was long and unforgiving. The terrain was rugged, the road nothing more than a trail winding through dense pines and rocky hills. Sarah pushed herself and the horse harder than she should have, but there was no time to waste. Every minute that passed, every mile she covered, Emily was at much further away. By mid-afternoon, the landscape began to shift. The air grew colder, the trees thinner, as the valley below opened up to reveal the remnants of Ash Hollow. The town's crumbling buildings looked like the skeletons of a once thriving community, now abandoned, forgotten by time. But Sarah knew better. The ashes of the past could still burn. She dismounted near the ridge, overlooking the town, and pulled out her spyglass. Through it, she scanned the broken landscape, her eyes trained on every movement. It didn't take long. A flicker of copper hair caught her eye. Emily. She was alive. Sarah's heart clenched, but her relief was short-lived. Emily was being led by two men, her hands bound behind her back, her face bruised but defiant. She was still fighting, still strong. That was Emily, but the scene only deepened Sarah's resolve. The Reeves gang was holding her daughter in the heart of their territory, and they had no idea who they were dealing with. Red Rose wasn't just a name, it was a force, and it would be unleashed tonight. But as Sarah lowered the spyglass, a cold realization settled in. She couldn't do this alone. The odds were too stacked against her. She needed help. The gang was well-armed and well-prepared. She had the skills, but she was no longer the lone wolf she had once been. She had more to lose now. Emily was counting on her. She glanced at her mare, then out at the ghost town below, the wind biting at her skin as the sun dipped lower. The decision was made. With a deep breath, Sarah turned her horse around and headed back the way she came, the cold wind on her face almost feeling like a warning. Her mind raced through the options. There were only a few she could trust, and they were far away. There was one man she needed to see. She needed Jackson. The memory of him, grizzled and scarred from their past days together, flashed in her mind. If anyone could still be counted on, it was him. He had been by her side through countless battles. A man who knew what it meant to fight, to survive, to live with the ghosts of the past. And now, she was going to ask him to help her face those same ghosts. By the time the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Sarah had already ridden halfway to Cooper's Crossing. The journey was long, but her mind was set. The ghosts of Ash Hollow would rise again, and she would bring them down. But first, she had to gather those who owed Red Rose more than just a favor. Jackson would help her, and then the fight would begin. And with that, the winds of fate began to shift, carrying Sarah towards her past and the people who would help her reclaim her daughter. But the choices ahead were fraught with danger. Would the old gang come together again? Would they answer a call? Time would tell. Sarah's first stop was Cooper's Crossing. The small settlement was nestled in a valley, surrounded by barren hills and dust-choked wind. It wasn't much, but it had been a safe haven for outlaws and those who knew how to hide in plain sight. As she rode into town, the familiar scent of gunpowder and sweat hung in the air, but there was something different about the place now. The edges of the world had shifted, and it was no longer just about survival. It was about saving Emily, about setting things right, about bringing down the ghosts that had haunted her for so long. She made her way to the small telegraph office, her eyes scanning the streets. Every face she passed seemed like a stranger, yet she felt the weight of so many memories pressing down on her. She was no longer Sarah Blackwood, the shopkeeper. She was Red Rose again, a woman with a past she couldn't escape, and now, a future she had to fight for. The operator behind the counter gave her a weary nod as she stepped inside, the smell of stale ink and old paper thick in the air. She didn't waste time. The telegrams were short, to the point, and carried the weight of the urgency she felt in her bones. She needed help, and she needed it fast. The first telegram was addressed to Jackson, her old right-hand man. He had always been quick with a gun, and even quicker with a plan. He'd left the life years ago, but Sarah knew better than anyone that men like him didn't just disappear. They hid. They bided their time, but when the call came, they answered. They had too much history together, and too much debt to ignore. The second went to Thunder, the Shoshone warrior who had been her ally when her gang was at its peak. He had always walked a fine line between worlds, between the justice of the law and the violence of survival. But after Eagles Canyon, he had taken on the role of peacemaker among his people, dedicating his life to keeping the peace that Sarah herself had torn apart. She knew he would understand the call. He always did. And the final telegram was from Martinez, the quiet tracker. He had been part of the original crew, always a man of few words. But when it came to finding people and tracking down the truth, he was the best. If anyone could find the hidden trails to Ash Hollow, it was him. Sarah sealed the telegrams with firm press, her hands steady despite the tension running through her veins. She didn't look back as she left the office. She couldn't afford to second-guess herself. The men she'd reached out to would come, or they wouldn't. But Emily's time was running out, and Sarah was done waiting. By the time she returned to Ash Hollow with her posse, Thunder, Jackson, Martinez, the air had changed. The winds, which had once seemed to carry the weight of the past, now felt like a harbinger of something else. Something was coming, and the time for hesitation was long gone. Emily was still inside Ash Hollow, locked in the heart of the ghost town, a pawn in a game that Sarah wasn't going to lose. Every minute that passed, every moment of delay, felt like a ticking clock. The weight of the world had descended upon Sarah once more. She was out of time. They had no time to waste. Night blanketed Ash Hollow in its cold embrace as Sarah and her former gang prepared for the most dangerous mission of their lives. The ghost town, with its dilapidated buildings and eerie silence, was now a place of tension, once a prosperous settlement. Now it was a hideout for those who dared cross the line between law and lawlessness. Sarah's heart raced in her chest as she tightened her grip on the reins, the sounds of the night only amplifying the weight of what lay ahead. Martinez, as quiet as the shadows themselves, set the distraction. He'd always been the stealthiest of the crew. Under the cover of darkness, he moved to the old smithy. A pile of dry timber stacked near the forge was the perfect target. With a few well-placed torches, the fire would soon catch. From there, the chaos would begin. The Reeves gang would rush to contain the flames, giving Sarah and her team the window they needed to slip inside the heart of the town. Thunder, her stalwart Shoshone ally, stood tall at her side. His face was unreadable, but she saw the same calm determination in his eyes that sustained him through countless battles. For years, he had walked the path of peace, but today, that path would lead him to a war. They moved toward the hotel at the center of the town, where Emily was being held captive. The plan was simple: get Emily out and get her to safety. The back entrance of the hotel was their point of entry, a route well hidden and out of sight of the gang. They would use the cover of the distraction to make their way to the second floor. As they reached the back door, Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. This wasn't just about rescuing Emily anymore. This was about avenging the wrongs done to her family, and to those who had died at the hands of the corrupt men who ran this town. The old wooden door creaked as Thunder pushed it open. They entered the dimly lit hallway, the faint glow of lanterns casting long shadows against the walls. Thunder moved silently, his eyes scanning the area. "She's just ahead," Sarah whispered, her voice low but steady. Her revolvers were drawn and ready. They crept forward, every step bringing them closer to the room where Emily was being kept. The tension in Sarah's body grew with each passing second. But just as they reached the second-floor staircase, the crack of gunfire split the air, followed by shouts and the sound of boots pounding against the wooden floor below. The distraction had been discovered. The Reeves gang had mobilized far quicker than they'd expected. Gunfire erupted from the hotel's lower floor, signaling that the fight was about to begin. Sarah cursed under her breath, but there was no time to waste. "We've been spotted," Thunder murmured, his hand resting on his weapon, ready to act. "Get to the room," Sarah ordered, her voice cold and determined. She was already moving before the words fully left her mouth, every instinct telling her to keep moving, to push forward, to get her daughter. The sound of gunfire echoed louder now, footsteps pounding from the hall below. They had seconds, just seconds, before the whole gang would know they were coming. Sarah dashed down the hall, her pulse quickening, adrenaline coursing through her veins. The door to the room was locked. Thunder quickly went to work, picking the lock with expert precision. Behind them, the noise from below grew louder. The gang was closing in. The plan had gone sideways, but Sarah couldn't stop now. Emily's life depended on it. The door clicked open and they rushed inside. Emily was there, sitting on the edge of a narrow bed. Her copper hair was disheveled, her face bruised, but there was defiance in her eyes. She didn't flinch as Sarah entered the room, but Sarah could see the fear she was trying to hide. "Emily," Sarah whispered urgently, moving toward her daughter. "Mama?" Emily's voice cracked, but she quickly composed herself. "I knew you'd come." Sarah's heart swelled with relief, but there was no time to savor it. "We need to move. Now." But as they turned to leave, the door burst open. A man stood in the doorway, rifle aimed directly at them. "Where do you think you're going?" The man sneered. It was Lucas Reeves. The trap had been set, and now it was too late to escape without a fight. With nowhere to run, Sarah and Thunder exchanged a brief, knowing look. They had no choice now. It was time to face the gang head-on. The sound of footsteps echoed from the stairwell. More of the gang was coming, and the door was the only way out. But Sarah wouldn't let them take her daughter. Not now. Not ever again. "Get down!" Sarah shouted to Emily, pushing her behind the bed for cover. Thunder readied his weapon, his eyes narrowing as he watched Lucas. "You've made a mistake," Sarah said coldly, her fingers tightening around the handle of her revolver. Lucas smirked. "The only mistake here is thinking you could come back and take over." Sarah's eyes locked onto the man's, fury and determination blazing in her gaze. "I'm not here to take over," she said, her voice cold. I'm here to end this. Just as she took a step forward, another voice rang out, louder than the gunfire. Hold your fire. The voice was unmistakable. It was Crawford, and Sarah knew without a doubt that the final battle was about to begin, is about to erupt. The ghosts of the past have come to claim their due, and in the chaos of gunfire, betrayals, and a fight for survival, Sarah will face the men who have controlled this land for too long. Will she finally be able to protect Emily, or will the past swallow her whole once again? Hold your fire. Crawford's voice rang out, commanding, but laced with panic. The sound of heavy boots echoed from the hall behind him as more men appeared in the doorway. Sarah's revolver never wavered. Her hand gripped it tighter, fingers aching with anticipation. The chaos of the battle had reached its peak, but she had one final mission. Everyone freeze. Crawford bellowed, his eyes darting between the armed men and Sarah. His face was a mask of barely contained fury, but Sarah saw something more: fear. "Let them go, Crawford," Sarah said coolly, her voice ice-cold and unwavering. "This is between you and me." The men behind him tensed, their guns still drawn. The sheriff had made his appearance known, and now it was all about settling the score. Emily's breath came quick behind her mother, her eyes wide, but Sarah gave her one quick, reassuring glance. "I'm not going anywhere, Mama," Emily said quietly, standing firm beside her. Despite her youth, there was something in her stance that mirrored Sarah's unyielding resolve. Crawford stepped forward, his face twisted in a sneer. "You think you can stop me? You think any of this matters? I've already won. Sarah, you may have been Red Rose once, but those days are over. You have no power here." The word stung, but Sarah didn't flinch. The weight of her past had forged her into someone who didn't need power to win anymore. She needed justice. "You think you've won?" she asked, her voice like a low growl. "You've been running this town with blood and lies for too long. That ends today." For a moment, the world seemed to freeze around them, the air thick with the tension of what was to come. Sarah's mind raced, memories of the massacre at Eagles Canyon, of Matthew's death, of her past that she had buried so deep, all flooding back. This wasn't just about her or Emily anymore. This was for every innocent soul who had suffered under Crawford's hand, for every promise she had made to Matthew that she had kept by surviving. And this was for the future, the life she could still have, with Emily, with the town, with the truth. "Crawford," Sarah said, her tone even, though her heart beat loud in her chest, "you're a coward hiding behind your badge. But no badge is going to save you now. You're going to answer for what you did." Before Crawford could respond, the building shook with a deafening sound of gunfire from the front. Martinez's distraction had worked, and the chaos had descended upon Ash Hollow like a storm. The Reeves gang, no longer able to maintain their composure, began to fight fiercely. "Now!" Sarah shouted, and without hesitation, she turned to Emily. "Get to the back, stay low, and move fast." Emily nodded, her face set with the same fierce determination Sarah had seen in Matthew. But the moment she turned, the door behind them exploded in a shower of splinters, and a familiar voice cried out, "You're too late, Rose." Lucas Reeves, his face contorted in anger, charged into the room, his gun raised. "Not today," Sarah snarled. With lightning speed, her revolver roared to life, and Lucas Reeves crumpled to the floor, blood pooling beneath him. But as his body hit the ground, another figure appeared behind him, Judge Crawford. "You think you've won, Sarah?" Crawford's voice was tight, but he carried himself with the arrogance of someone who thought he had all the power in the world. His hand was steady, the grip of a man who had once held dominion over this land. The gun in his hand shook slightly, but his voice never faltered. "This town is mine. You're nothing but a ghost from a bygone era, and you're going to regret coming back." "I regret nothing," Sarah replied sharply, her eyes narrowing on him. "Not anymore." In a blur of motion, Sarah lunged, her revolver raised to meet him. But before she could pull the trigger, a loud crash echoed to the back of the building. More men. They weren't just from the Reeves gang. These men wore badges, official, territorial ones. "Federal Marshal, stand down, A voice barked from behind her. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The moment she dreaded had come. The law was turning against her, just like it always had. The blood of so many innocents had stained her hands, and now that stain was dragging her down again. "You've been hunting me for too long, Crawford. Now, you'll face what you've been hiding for years," Sarah said as she slowly turned toward the new threat, her face hardening into the steely resolve of Red Rose. But before any more moves could be made, a new voice rang out, cutting through the mounting tension. "Enough!" It was Jackson, stepping forward from the shadows, his rifle aimed at the gathered lawmen. He looked older, but there was no mistaking the fire still burning behind his eyes. "Jackson?" Sarah blinked in disbelief, her heart pounding. Had he come to rescue her after all these years? "Did you really think you could bring me down that easily?" Jackson's voice was low, almost dangerous. "You have no idea what you're up against, Sarah. You've been playing this game with your hands tied behind your back, but I've been working on the inside." Before she could process his words, the room exploded into movement. The lawmen raised their guns, but Jackson was too quick, taking down one man with a precise shot. The others hesitated for just a second, allowing the rest of Sarah's team to move. "Now, Sarah," Jackson yelled, urging her to act. Suddenly, everything shifted. It was no longer just about surviving. It was about winning. With Emily at her side, Sarah raced toward the back of the hotel, ready to make a final stand. She knew the truth now, and there would be no turning back. But just as Sarah and Emily neared the back door, a figure blocked their path, a familiar silhouette that made Sarah freeze. "Running again, Sarah?" The voice was unmistakable, cold, filled with disdain. "You never learn." But just as Sarah and Emily neared the back door, a figure blocked their path, a familiar silhouette that made Sarah freeze. "Running again, Sarah?" The voice was unmistakable, cold, filled with disdain. "You never learn." Sarah's heart lurched as her eyes locked onto the figure that now stood between them and freedom. Lucas Reeves, the same man who had hunted her for years, a ghost from her past who had always believed Red Rose would resurface. She hadn't expected him to be here, not at this moment, not when the end was so close. His weathered face twisted into a smirk as he slowly drew his gun. "Thought you'd escape, did you? Thought you could just walk away, leaving all the mess behind. But you and I both know there's no running from what's coming for you. Not this time." "Move," Sarah said through gritted teeth, her voice low but filled with the cold edge of resolve. Her hand hovered near her revolver, the weight of the silver-plated Remington in her holster a constant reminder of what she once was, of what she could still become. Lucas chuckled darkly, a laugh that echoed off the walls of the room. "You don't think I'd let you ride out of here, do you? This is where it ends. Sarah, it's always where it ends." Emily, standing beside her mother, clutched her breath, her eyes wide with fear, but also growing defiance. She had seen her mother in action before, never this cold, never this certain. The air thickened, the tension palpable as Sarah's mind raced. She could take Lucas down in an instant. The same skill that had once made Red Rose fear across the West was still there, alive and pulsing through her veins. But her daughter, Emily, needed her now, needed her to be more than a killer. "Lucas," Sarah said quietly, her voice a razor-sharp whisper, "you know better than to try and stop me. Move out of the way, or you'll regret it." He took a step forward, his hand tightening around the gun. "I don't think you understand, Sarah. There's no more Red Rose. Not here, not now. You're just a widow with a past you can't outrun. And I'm going to make sure you pay for it." For a brief moment, time seemed to stretch. The weight of the gun in Sarah's holster, the memories of the lives she had taken, the ghosts of those who had fallen, her entire past pressing on her, threatening to swallow her whole. But then, with a flash of anger and resolve, Sarah's hand moved, faster than he could react. Her revolver was in her grasp. She didn't hesitate, didn't even think. The sound of the shot rang out, a deafening crack in the silence of the room. Lucas Reeves staggered backward, his chest blooming with blood. His eyes widened in shock as he crumpled to the floor. "I warned you," Sarah muttered, her voice cold and final. With Lucas on the ground, Sarah and Emily moved swiftly, past the fallen outlaw and toward the back door. They had come so far. There was no time to waste. As they stepped outside, the cool night air greeted them. The horses were waiting, their hooves kicking up the dust of the old town, ready to carry them into the night, into freedom. But just as they neared the stables, a new voice echoed from the shadows. "Sarah." The voice was unmistakable, low and commanding, sending a chill down her spine. "Judge Crawford." Sarah froze. There was no mistaking the voice of the man who had manipulated her life for so long. The man responsible for the deaths of so many innocent people. The man who had orchestrated the massacre at Eagles Canyon, twisting the truth into a weapon. Crawford stepped forward from the shadows, his face shadowed by the brim of his wide hat. His voice was filled with icy certainty. "I think you made a grave mistake, Sarah. I will make sure you regret this." Sarah stood tall, meeting his cold gaze with a strength that surprised even her. She had faced worse than him. She had faced herself. "I'm not running any more, Crawford," Sarah said, her voice firm, unwavering. "And you won't be able to stop me. Not this time." Crawford's face twisted into a sneer. "We'll see about that." Just as the tension reached its peak, the sharp crack of gunfire echoed through the night, the sound unmistakable, a single shot that sent a message. From the darkened doorway of the saloon, Sheriff Daniels emerged, his gun drawn, aiming directly at Crawford. "Not so fast, Judge," the sheriff said, his voice steady but filled with authority. "I'm not letting you leave this town, not this time." Crawford froze, his sneer faltering for the briefest moment. He had underestimated Pine Ridge. He had underestimated Sarah Blackwood. And now he would pay for it. With the sheriff's arrival, the long, twisted game of power, betrayal, and survival finally came to a head. But just as the tension broke, a single rider appeared from the distance, galloping toward them. It was Marshal Reed, the federal marshal who had promised justice, the man who had been working in the shadows to bring Crawford down for decades. He was not alone. Behind him rode Thunder, Jackson, and Martinez, the people who had once ridden with Red Rose, now standing with her as a family united by a common cause. The air was thick with anticipation as Reed drew to a halt in front of Sarah, his voice low but resolute. "It's over, Sarah. We have the evidence. Crawford is done." Sarah looked at the marshal, at the men who had stood by her side, at Emily, who had been with her every step of the way. And for the first time in years, she felt the weight of the past lift from her shoulders. They had done it. Justice had been served.